Tensions are escalating across the Middle East as the Israel-Hamas war spills over into neighboring countries. This is the aftermath of an airstrike in Syria's capital over the weekend. Iran has accused Israel of killing 5 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard in the attack. Meanwhile, just hours later in Iraq, at least 2 U.S. service members were injured in an Iran-backed missile fire on an airbase there. This as U.S. fighter jets struck more Iran-backed Houthi targets in Yemen over the weekend. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Peter Mansoor served as a top aide to General David Petraeus in Iraq, and I spoke to him earlier this morning about those airstrikes through the Middle East and the fears of a broader regional conflict. Colonel Mansoor, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'll start with the latest over the weekend. U.S. military personnel reportedly targeted on an airbase in Iraq by an Iranian-backed militia. What do you make of this targeting of American positions?
Well, this is a continuation of Iranian pressure against the United States. They want U.S. military forces to leave Iraq, and it's also tied in with the so-called axis of resistance in support of the Hamas in Gaza. But this is a continuing effort by Iranian-backed militias to pressure the United States and the Iraqi government to have U.S. forces withdraw from Iraq.
There were also some airstrikes in Syria over the weekend on 4 senior members of Iran's security forces. They blame Israel. I wonder, between that and what happened in Iraq, how concerned you are about a broader regional war, because it does seem to be sort of bubbling along into other areas.
Bubbling is actually a good term, doctrinal, no doubt, but whether this conflict is going to expand is really up to Iran. It is the one that's directing the various proxy groups around the Middle East to attack Israel and the United States in support of the fighters in Gaza. And Israel's striking back. So they're hitting Quds Force operatives in Damascus. It's the only way they can hit back at Iran without striking Iran directly. And that would, of course, expand the conflict exponentially in the Middle East. Iran, I think, so.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Colonel.
Iran so far has been pretty calculated in its metering of force and the use of force. It continues to launch rockets via Hezbollah at northern Israel, continues via the Houthis to attack ships in the Red Sea, but it hasn't really done anything that crosses the boundary into a wider regional war.
The Washington Post is reporting that the Biden administration is looking at plans for sustained military campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. Previous strikes failed to stop the attacks in the Red Sea, as you point out. Of course, the Houthis are also backed by Iran. What message do you think the U.S. is sending then?
The United States is sending a message that it's going to protect the global commons. The Red Sea is an international waterway, and the Houthis are attacking ships indiscriminately. It's not just ships headed to Israel. It's not just Israeli-owned ships, but it is ships of all nationalities and no matter what they're carrying. So the United States really is in a tough position here. It knows it doesn't want to get involved in a conflict in the Middle East, but as one of the strongest nations on the planet, it really needs to keep the global commons open for the good of all.
So last Sunday, I spoke to the former chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs, Mike Mullen, and I asked him if this is essentially a proxy war with Iran that is happening right now. I know that President Biden, or at least the United States, said that they sent a private message to Iran about what to do in the days ahead and how to respond. Do you think that means that they are telling Iran it is going to be isolated, that they are telling Iran to back off because this will grow into something bigger, or do you agree that we're in a proxy war and it will be hard to stop it from unfolding?
Well, it won't be hard to stop it, provided Iran wants to tell the Houthis to back off. This really is all tied to Gaza. When the Israeli invasion of Gaza ends, then the strikes in the Red Sea will end. And this is what Iran is telling us. Of course, we're telling them, back off. We don't want a wider regional conflict, but we're ready to launch strikes wherever our interests are threatened. And this is where it's going to go back and forth again until the Israeli invasion of Gaza ends. But now we have Prime Minister Netanyahu who says that invasion might go into 2025.
So let's talk about a little bit about that conflict, about the war in Gaza and Israel's stated intention to destroy Hamas. You've written about how one of the only successful wars against a terrorist group in the past 2 decades was against ISIS. What do you foresee is what do you foresee about his stated goal to eliminate Hamas? Is that feasible?
Well, if you look at all the elements of national power, diplomacy, information, economics, military, the Israelis are focused only on the military aspect of power. He wants to pound Hamas into dust and completely eliminate its military capabilities. They've already gone after their political operatives in Lebanon, and they'll probably try to strike them in other areas of the Middle East. But this isn't going to get the job done. As we found out in Iraq and Afghanistan, unless you have a political settlement endgame, then you can destroy all the forces you want, but they'll just regenerate. And Hamas 2.0 might look worse than Hamas 1.0.
Yeah, I was reading this morning that because Israel's so focused on the military response, the idea that getting 100 or so hostages released it seems almost impossible if there's no diplomatic or political solution being sought after as well.
Well, that's, unfortunately, that is a fact of life for the hostages and their families. They are not the priority of the Netanyahu administration. Regardless of what they say, the actions speak louder than words. And to get them, the hostages, the rest of them back at this point would require a comprehensive ceasefire. And that's simply not in the cards as long as Prime Minister Netanyahu is in charge of this conflict.
What do you what is your biggest concern as you watch this unfold and given some of the statements Netanyahu has made?
Well, my concern is for the Palestinian people. Almost 1.9 of 2.2 million have been uprooted from their homes. They're backed into a small corner of the Gaza Strip. They're suffering from malnutrition and lack of medical supplies. And, it's not genocide because Israel isn't trying to kill them all, but it is a horrific humanitarian disaster. And the United States, I think, sooner rather than later, is going to have to pressure Israel to end this conflict and to come up with a diplomatic and political solution, which unfortunately for the Israelis is going to mean a Palestinian state. And that's what they don't want to confront right now.
Colonel Mansoor, thank you for your expertise. Appreciate it, sir.
Appreciate it. Thanks.